Coming up next, it's Space Ghost Coast to Coast, followed by Old Canada on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Old Canada, followed by Late Night Black and White on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Late Night Black and White, followed by Droopy on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Droopy, followed by Popeye on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Popeye, followed by Rocky and Bullwinkle on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Rocky and Bullwinkle, followed by Dudley Do-Right on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Dudley Do-Right, followed by Scooby Movies on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Scooby Movies, followed by The Flintstones on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's The Flintstones, followed by Scooby-Doo on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Captain Planet on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's the Bugs and Daffy Show on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Mike, Blue, and Og, followed by Alvin and the Chipmunks on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Alvin and the Chipmunks, followed by a pup named Scooby-Doo on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's a pup named Scooby-Doo, followed by Tom and Jerry Kids on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Dexter's Laboratory on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's the Powerpuff Girls, followed by Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? On Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Followed by the Flintstones on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's more Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Followed by the Flintstones on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's the Flintstones, followed by the Jetsons on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's the Acme Hour, followed by Animaniacs on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Animaniacs, followed by the Cartoon Show on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's the Cartoon Show, followed by Dexter's Laboratory on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Dexter's Laboratory on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Ed, Edd and Eddy, followed by Toonami on Cartoon Network.
Coming up next, it's Toonami, followed by Prime Time on Cartoon Network.
Coming up next, it's Prime Time, followed by Bugs and Daffy on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Bugs and Daffy, followed by Tom and Jerry on Cartoon Network. Coming up next, it's Tom and Jerry, followed by Toonami Midnight Run on Cartoon Network.